So here's the scenario. You are a president of a company in the bioscience and life science sector. You just completed your funding round. Now, if you were to relocate to a major hub like Boston or California, that capital may last you about, 5 years of runway. But what if I told you that for that same amount of capital could last you maybe 10 years of runway in South Dakota? Stick around for the end of this video as I break down the new market study from the USD Discovery District and how that reality of extending your runway could be a possibility. Whether you're a CEO or a president navigating mid-stage therapeutics, manufacturing, or research and development, the 2025 Mapping the Growth Potential Market Study from the USD Discovery District offers a data-driven snapshot of the bioscience landscape. Today, I'll walk you through its core findings on global trends, funding dynamics, and regional opportunities. Now, this isn't advice. This report is simply a culmination of my travels in 2025 and an analysis. It's simply a reference point so that you can compare it to your notes as well to inform your strategy. Now, let's break it down. It starts with the introduction of the USD Discovery District. And I think the key message that I was trying to drive home here was that if we were to take South Dakota and compare its research and development activity across the entire country, yes, South Dakota is probably going to be at the end of the list of many scenarios. However, I think how we are interpreting that message at the USD Discovery District is that it's not so much of a gap, it's more of a direction. It's more of a direction of what we can do to keep growing the industry in South Dakota. And I think the other thing to keep in note too, as the study kind of moves on, is that these numbers, sometimes it requires you to look at the numbers differently, right? So in the environment where South Dakota is ranked at the bottom, how I think of that is that it's not so much saying that our students and our research quality is subpar. It just means that we can still output the same amount of research and development with limited resource. So therefore, I see that as a strength. We are incredibly resilient and we can do much more with less. So I think that really speaks to the culture of South Dakota in broader terms. So the key findings in the market study really starts off with the international, US funding, and then South Dakota. So internationally, at the 2025 Bio International Convention, which is one of the biggest gathering places for the entire industry globally, a majority of the participants were from international firms. So this tells us that international companies are looking to enter the US market, considering that, tariffs have been a really big talking point from our administration over the last year. But out of those companies, the other interesting thing was that most of those companies, they had certain objectives, and the leading objective was out-licensing opportunities, which we'll discuss later. When it comes to the funding side, total early stage funding, we're looking at about $9.2 billion. And that, comparing that from 2024 to 2025 levels, that's still about like a 20% decrease in funding. So that tells me, at least on the private side, with everything that's going on from the FDA changes and leadership, international, geopolitics, inflation, there's all these external factors. Investors are, they're not at the same levels as 2024, not considering, AI, right? AI is still an incredibly hot topic, and how do you create more AI native type of platforms and companies? And I think the bioscience and life science sectors, they're still trying to carve out that model. Now, when it comes to South Dakota, I think the interesting insight here was I came across a study from the South Dakota Department of Transportation, their freight plan, and they projected, to my surprise, $6 billion in pharmaceutical imports in South Dakota by 2050. I had no idea that pharmaceuticals even was the top 5 of imports in South Dakota. However, this tells me that perhaps there are increase in healthcare activity, coupled with increase of research and development. those must be key driving indicators for this projected 6 billion in pharmaceutical imports by 2025. And lastly, the USD Discovery District is truly, in my opinion, the state's dedicated life science research park. And we currently, right now, have about 25,000 available square feet of corn shell so that mature life science and bioscience companies can come in and design their own facilities. And that is on the market right now. So that is truly the opportunity for our audience in this market study. So let's jump right into the funding side of things. When I was at the Bio International Convention, I was talking to one of these startups, and they're from India. And as I was explaining to them just about what was so unique about South Dakota, they pretty much phrased this perfectly for me. They said like a business may have 5 years of runway in Boston, but for the same capital, that business can have a 10-year runway in South Dakota. And that was just the perfect way to sum up how South Dakota, and I guess the Midwest in general, is positioned, especially with some of this kind of start-stop funding programs, either federally, statewide, across the country. Funding now is just so critical for research. And for those companies that do have funding, how long is that money going to last you? And how are you going to keep those milestones, right? So that was, I think, was the biggest, the perfect summary of this funding section. The public markets, I think this was really just a snapshot, like all the changes that we saw in 2025. I mean, considering that, we have a new administration. In early February 2025, one of the first things was the Make America Healthy Again executive order with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And then following that, there was a new FDA commissioner, Dr. Marty Makary, who assumed the role in March 2025. And if you look at the graph up here, that's where that dip really kind of happens, where, all this leadership change occurs nationally, and the XBI market definitely takes a dip, so with the SP 500. But what I find really interesting about how the market performed this year, and this is just looking at the numbers, is that this tells me that this industry is resilient. I mean, despite all the external factors and leadership changes, the industry was able to catch back up, so much so that the XBI industry was outperforming the S&P 500 by November of 2025. So that gives me a lot of hope. And that gives me a great signal that, okay, we are definitely in a recovery period, much like we've seen in previous years. But this year definitely had a lot more of like a humanized tone to it, right? Because we saw the leadership changes and how that really affects the industry. Expanding from the public funding, we go into the SBIR programs in the states. I mean, these are federal programs that are administered through various agencies. And I would think another interesting insight for this one is that historically, South Dakota, if you go on to SBIR.gov and you look at the awards, historically you always see defense technologies, manufacturing technologies, perhaps sometimes ag as well. And that makes sense. I mean, I feel like those are some of the strong focal points in South Dakota when it comes to research. But in recent years, I'm seeing more of an increase in this bioscience and life science sector, which makes me incredibly happy that this industry is starting to get more attention. To get ahead of myself here, at the bio convention, there was objectives, right? So if we kind of scroll down to this page here on page 10, the bio convention, out of all the participants, they had certain objectives. It was out licensing, in licensing, manufacturing, distribution. And if you kind of just ignore the objectives and you just look at the top therapeutic areas, neurological diseases and inflammatory diseases was the leading therapeutic areas. And going back to South Dakota, I see 2 awards from OmegaQuant Analytics and Interact Tech, both based in Sioux Falls, and are both receive awards that are focusing on neurological disorders. So that was a connection moment for me, right? You have this international and national trend of therapeutic areas, and South Dakota is also focused on those therapeutic areas like neurological disorders. So again, that was another aha moment for me. Private markets, I think at the end of the day, pre-seed and seed, so this is the early capital. I would say, just looking at it right now without the full year data, the activities from 2024 to 2025, it's probably going to come out about even, plus or minus a little bit. When it comes to Series A though, I think that was kind of the biggest change. In 2024, we saw a big spike in Series A funding in April, whereas in 2025, I haven't seen anything up to that point just yet. So I think that is to be determined. And when I added, the pre-seed, seed, and Series A funding and calling that just early stage funding in general, 2024, 2025, we're seeing about a 20% decrease. Again, I think why this is happening is probably a lagging indicator, right, of what's going on in the public markets, what's happening at the FDA side of things. I am also seeing that, AI, in my opinion, is not a bubble. AI is definitely here to stay. And again, to get ahead of myself, the announcement of the Genesis mission, that is kind of another signal that companies in the bioscience and life science sectors, they're now going to have to ask themselves, how do we become like AI native in our research and development? How do we incorporate AI and to maintain that scientific rigor and integrity to develop these products for market? So I think that is still has a big play to some of this fluctuation happening in the private markets as well. Going to the industry insights. So I jumped ahead of myself earlier, revisiting these objectives. I think what's really important about this slide is this is just a really nice definition slide where, where we share this with our partners in South Dakota, but also for the industry, just to know like, okay, if your competitors or your partners, what are their objectives at this convention? And it was clear to me that out licensing was the main objective. So out licensing was effectively these companies are acting like a university tech transfer office, right? They have intellectual property and they want to license that out to co-develop it and commercialize it with partners. In licensing is the opposite of that. So they're trying to find technologies to bring in-house to then add to their platform. And then manufacturing and distribution is, quite self-explanatory. But I think the other key takeaway from this slide is that sometimes when we think of bioscience and life science companies, they're not always just looking for funding. They're looking for collaborations. They're looking for partnerships to really accelerate their development of their tech. So we're getting to the meat of the market study right now, and this is really some of the bulk of it. I would say these middle sections is kind of scratching those tensions that we all have felt in the last 5 years, especially in the era of post-COVID. So I sat in this panel discussion at the Bio International Convention, and it was really tense in the room. Like, I'll just say right now, it was really tense in the room. It was like almost COVID was a dirty word to say at this convention where it represents the industry, right? So what is clear to me and what I learned through this panel discussion is the significance of antivirals. So to break this down, my key takeaways from this few pages is that it was a reminder that antivirals like remdesivir were originally developed for Ebola, but it was repurposed for COVID-19. And it was a moment for me to recognize that like the research that was invested into these antivirals historically, that is where innovation happens, right? So in the event that there is another pandemic, what resources, what tools in the toolbox can we pull from? And it's very clear to me that that investment in research should be specific but it should also be spread out evenly and evenly distributed so that in the event of the next pandemic, we have all of our bases covered. And from the industry in this panel, what they're saying is that we are not covered right now. We are still behind due to lack of focus and lack of investment. And here's a great poll quote from Mr. James Anderson. Without increased focus and investment in antiviral drug development, the world is at risk of facing a devastating impact from future outbreaks of new and known viruses. So I think the other interesting thing there was, across 13 viral families with pandemic potential, only 27 compounds are in clinical development, excluding coronavirus. So that tells me that the research and the attention is not evenly spread out. This was incredibly a very technical presentation, and I'm not going to be here and act like I know all of this because I'm not the expert, right? But my takeaways from these two slides was like, okay, our research and development is not just a reaction to the threat. Our research and development activity is the culmination of years, if not decades, of research in areas where innovation happens when we take things that we don't think about that could be a solution, but it was there for us because we spent the time and effort investing in those things. And that ultimately builds a stronger response to a pandemic. The next slide here is really kind of obligatory nod to the great resources and the great communities that do exist in the US, right? So I sat on this panel discussion where they were effectively up there, and they had the opportunity to recruit and showcase their wonderful work that they're doing in their respective states. So we highlighted in this study Massachusetts, North Carolina, Texas, and California. I think these are, again, moments where I come into a lot of insecurity, right? When all of these other states have so much incentives and they're in the billions of dollars. I always think to myself, okay, well, how does South Dakota even compete with that? I think how to address this kind of goes back to my statement earlier, is that these numbers are all relative. So I simply was like, okay, if we're going to play this numbers game, what is the NIH research activity and awards since 2024? And I found from the public database that it's been over $56 million, right? Which is a big number. That may not be a big number for a state like Massachusetts or Texas, but that's a huge number for South Dakota. Again, we have less than 1 million people in the state. We're a rural state, we're incredibly spread out. But I am always impressed and always am proud of the students, our universities, and our professionals in this space, because we can still deliver industry quality work with limited resources. In addition to that too, is from these states that was presented on the slide, you have to think about cost of living. I remember when I first graduated school, I moved to Colorado, and I didn't even know what income tax was. But at the end of the day, that affects you, right? Especially in today's economy too. It's like we need to think about, okay, how do we have enough monies to maintain our quality of life? So I think that now more than ever is going to be a big driving point. So South Dakota has no corporate or personal income tax, and I think the other piece tier 2 is that quality of life. I mean, South Dakota is very spread out, as I said before. And, the USD Discovery District, it's in Northwest Sioux Falls, but it's about like less than 10 minute drive to downtown Sioux Falls, right? And Sioux Falls is the biggest city in South Dakota. I mean, these are the things that sometimes people don't think about when it comes to quality of life. We're not stuck in traffic. We don't have to do 1 hour long commutes if you're living in Sioux Falls. And I think those are just, at the end of the day, it adds to that net benefit of your quality of life and managing kind of like that work-life balance for a lot of these companies. The next couple slides here talks about the FDA commissioner. So I sat in a presentation, took some notes here. of kind of what his visions were as being the new leader of the FDA. And I think it was interesting to me that the FDA has already deployed AI tools internally. So that was kind of interesting, that seeing the adoption of AI even at that level was really interesting. It was also a great reminder that the FDA includes food. When we think about the bioscience and life science sector, includes other things than just drug development or medical devices. We're also talking about the food industry. And I think the other interesting thing too, that he mentioned during his presentation was kind of the reality of relying on animal testing. I think that's been a message that's been communicated in South Dakota for quite some time as well. There's several projects coming from South Dakota mines in Rapid City that are focused on kind of this joint on a chip, or just kind of other technologies that focuses on technologies that kind of reduce your reliance on animal testing. And I think, again, that reveals that we have bright minds here in South Dakota, and to see it validated from the national perspective from the FDA, that gives me a lot of hope. Yeah, so when it comes to the infrastructure piece of things, what I said earlier was, I just thought it was so interesting that, by 2050, the South Dakota Department of Transportation is estimating a 200% increase in pharmaceutical imports, which makes it the second highest imported commodity in South Dakota. And my why for this would be, well, that could be a culmination of our healthcare expansion and healthcare activity in South Dakota, having two major healthcare systems located in Sioux Falls. This is also could be a result of just increased research and development. But something also tells me it's simply supply chain and distribution. I mean, Sioux Falls is smack dab right next to that I-90, 929 corridor. And I think that is so underrated as an advantage. If you think back to your times in COVID, I mean, we relied on our truck drivers, right? We relied on our truck drivers to transport goods across this entire country. And having those major interstates and being geographically centered in the US, that would make sense to me, that why we're seeing such a big push where, perhaps other regions along those major interstates are also growing in activity in healthcare research, and they need to, access and transport those goods through South Dakota. And I think our response to the South Dakota Science Technology Plan is that it's simply, we can't forget about the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure for communities to thrive, right? So if we look at science technology, typically infrastructure may just be, our healthcare systems and our universities, campuses, right? But when we look at other districts or other kind of areas of land development across the state, those also need infrastructure development so that private industry can co-locate and share resources in a common area. And I think that's where USD Discovery District truly shines in that regard, where we are kind of this dedicated bioscience and life science research park in South Dakota. It's been going on for several decades, and we are just getting started with our first building. And I think this section of the market study too is a great opportunity to really communicate the USD Discovery District's mission. And that is to foster economic development by growing university research capacity, resources, and talent, connecting these core university strengths with private sector resources and companies, foster entrepreneurship and commercialization, and lastly, to facilitate the creation of physical infrastructure necessary to support creation and attraction of research and innovation-based businesses. And I think our milestones in 2025 definitely exemplify all of those things, and we're aligned with our mission. Specifically in January, we completed our Building 1 construction, which is total about 57,000 total gross feet, square feet. We did that on time and on budget. By February, we were getting commitments from tenants. We celebrated a grand opening in April, and by July, OmegaQuant Analytics, which is a Sioux Falls life science company, they were moved into a lab that was operationally ready. And later on to the year, we have a leadership expansion and changes. And then we've also kind of just revitalized all of our digital communications and marketing strategy to kind of meet our tenant prospects where they are. So all of this to say is that, we've put a lot of time and effort in 2025 to really kind of seize this moment of momentum. And we could not have done this without our collaborators, without our partners, without our board, and without our community in Sioux Falls. So this is definitely a great, just thank you for showing your support for us in the state. And the last page of the market study is definitely just a little more details about the USD Discovery District. I think one big misconception, well, I think there's two big misconceptions. Number one, we are not an incubator. And number two, we have core and shell space available for lease, meaning we do not have built out labs or built out offices, right? For bioscience and life science companies. We deferred to having this core and shell design build process so that companies can design and build their own spaces. Because through our research and our conversations with industry, companies want their own space, and every company has their own unique needs, right? And for us at the Discovery District to be truly a resource and to serve this industry, we can't be pigeonholing them into, okay, well, here's your lab that's already built out. You're stuck with this. We want to give them the complete flexibility and the complete freedom to think about what their best space could look like. And that's why we're doing the core and shell. So those are the main two misconceptions. And at the end of the day, we have about 25,000 square feet that's available right now. That's core and shell, and that's leasable and available right now in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. But I think the other piece here too is that we're not doing this completely in isolation. We're located right next to the University of South Dakota Sioux Falls campus. We are about within a 5-mile radius between downtown Sioux Falls, our airport, Sanford Research, Vera Virtual Care Center, Sanford. It's a really, truly interesting moment right now. And the other thing right here is that the USD Discovery District is truly an example of a public-private partnership, where it's not just the state, it's also the city, it's also academia, it's government, it's all of these entities coming together for one common mission. And I think that is incredibly valuable, and it also kind of demonstrates all the work and all the people that requires to make something like this happen. South Dakota has a real opportunity to lead in bioscience, not by copying major hubs, but by building a model that gives companies time, clarity, and operating runway. The market study provides data and directional clarity on funding trends, industry needs, federal regulatory shifts, and where South Dakota can realistically compete. In summary, the 2025 study maps a resilient yet challenged bioscience sector. Global collaborations are rising, funding is selective, preparedness gaps persisting, but state level supports also vary across the nation. Download the full market study right now for figures, sources, and a deeper dive into our insights. Thank you for watching.